Hello, my name is Leslie Shankman, and I have worked with the Stellar Nations cosmology since 2013, and I've since become a teacher and guide. And some of you will be coming to this video well aware of what the Stellar Nations is, and others have never heard of it. So I'll first take a moment to give us a little grounding in what this cosmology is, and then we'll go on in this video to look at the energies for the year of 2024 in terms of the Stellar Nations cosmology. The Stellar Nations soul families are a 2-volume set that record the galactic history of the Milky Way galaxy. And this information came to Dr. Beatrix Czeizel and Aniko Gresko, who live in Hungary. And this happened in 2005 when they were approached by the delegates of the 13 stellar nations. And they've long been involved with stellar consciousness. In fact, Dr. Beatrix, who is an MD and a homeopath in this life, was indeed the founder of the Lemurian Island of the Stars back in the times of Lemuria. There were 133 islands, and one of them was the Island of the Stars. And the mission of that island was to apprehend the stellar codes and interweave them on the Earth plane. And a lot more. That's covered in other books. But anyway, they were approached by a different kind of consciousness in 2005, which really is because we were moving more deeply into the light of the photon belt. And it was time for us to understand our cosmic history as recorded in the stars, because we can really understand the stars as sentient beings. They're essentially pieces of our consciousness. They are where aspects of our souls live. And we can think of them as the cells in our larger light bodies, because we are starting to really wake up to the fact and remember that we are consciousness that exists across many levels of awareness. We're not just in this physical body, but we have broader perceptions. So we are born with a remembering field around us, a stellar mantle, if you will, that is a matrix of all these different stars where our souls reside. And this set of books is real. These are living volumes, meaning that the information here, yes, it's recorded, it's telling us our history, but once we start engaging with it, it wakes up our remembering about the aspects of ourselves that are concurrently on these stars and learning and evolving with us simultaneously as we're in our physical bodies. The Akashic chronicles of the Milky Way galaxy are held in Antares. Antares is a star in the heart of the Scorpio constellation, and it's a 7th dimensional star. And on the 7th dimension, the energy is expressed as frequencies or sound patterns. And Bay and Aniko had their consciousness expanded to Antares, and one at a time they were taken through the stellar pathway and the cosmic history of each stellar soul family. Now, because our cosmic history was apprehended in sound patterns, frequencies from Antares, those patterns are energetic outpicturings that were then fleshed into myth or pictures that show relational dynamics. And that's what the stories of the stellar soul families are in the Stellar Nations books. So these myths, when we engage with them, activate our inner knowing of these frequencies, and they help us remember who we are as the entire morphogenic field of our body. So that's our etheric body, our emotional body, mental body, higher layers of our light body, and of course then our physical body. The 13 stellar soul families could be thought of as destiny pathways delineated through the stars. They're forms and frames of experiencing. They're basic archetypes that we actually know well inside. And each one has a specific mission, and we've resonated with different soul families. We're actually parts of them through the history of our consciousness. And we could think of these almost as our galactic DNA that form us and inform us when we come into form for our incarnations. Now, after Bay and Aniko received all this information, which took about 18 months, at the end of 2007, they anchored it all. And then they were shown that starting in 2008, there'd be like a divine plan working out where a stellar nation would come forward in a given year. And it would come forward with the cosmic history stories into our collective unconsciousness. The frequency would be active and would be starting to stimulate our memories, but it was coming up from our unconscious, and a lot of what was coming forward is the lapse patterns of these stories, where we kind of lost ourselves or went off the mark. So this year, 2024, we have this stellar soul family of the great felines and the dragons coming forward. So this video is about what is that energy and what does that bring to us this year? What are we being asked to remember and to heal? Let's move in to the galactic myths of the cosmic history chronicles, the stellar nations. In this year of 2024, we have the energy of the great felines coming forward, as well as the energy of the dragons. And this isn't the first time that they've come forward into our collective consciousness. That first happened in 2011. And at that point, what we realized from them coming, we realized what the true higher nature of a warrior is, because each one of these nations represents a warrior aspect of ourselves, and we'll look at that more specifically next. But in general, we actually started to understand that a warrior is someone who stands up for a very high principle. In fact, would even give their life for that principle. And we hadn't understood that purity of what a warrior is prior to 2011, because we've been so imbued with different wars for so long. And then again, in 2017, it was the year of the cosmic humans. And in that year, every nation came forward with kind of their most pressing backstory and shadow that we hadn't heard yet. And the backstory of the great felines is incredibly tragic and is so pivotal to who we are as a collective and individual. And that's what we'll go over here in this presentation next too, because we need to know this full cosmic history, because now in 2024 we're being asked to really understand and clear the patterns of the dragon and the great feline in their fallen aspects, so that they can rise to the glory of what they actually are, and that's what we actually are. Also, let's bring this notion of a warrior into the practical realms, and that is of everyday life. I mean, being a warrior is not just about going off to war, fighting for your nation. Being a warrior is standing up for a principle or a value. It can be at your workplace, it could be at school, it could be in some kind of institution, it could be in your family. So if we have codes of the dragon or the great feline, we will have a certain kind of warrior aspect to us in how we respond in the scenarios of life. And we may have more of a dragon type response or a great feline response. The stellar nation of the dragons is called Lithianos Draco in the stellar language, which translates to the heart of the warrior. And the mission of the dragon aspect of ourselves is to be the keepers of divine order, divine law, divine power, divine will. They see that the heavenly laws are obeyed. Now, these are all the stars in the dragon destiny pathway, and we're certainly not going to go over those, but I show it to you to give you an idea, and also specifically to speak a little bit about the nature of the dragon and what their mission is. The dragon, we could say, is a yang pathway. It's much more masculine. It's very disciplined. It's akin to the Eastern martial arts and learning that kind of precision and discipline. You'll see across the top where these 8 lightning rods are. These are 8 stars that represent the 8 virtues of the dragon warrior, and essentially they're each a step of a very tough initiation cycle that has to be mastered by a dragon. And the first 5 of these are actually the balance of the elements. We've got the balance of fire in Rastaban, and then if you follow across, the balance of water, the balance of earth, the balance of air, and the balance of motion is really the balance of ether, or the ether element. And so the dragons are masters of the elements, and these are used, they give them part of their power, and they give them the ability to create worlds and to destroy worlds. And so these are actual capabilities that they have, or then that's part of us, remember, as well as that's more of a sort of a physical manifestation of these fire, water, earth, air elements. But we also can understand that there's a metaphysical aspect to this, because the fire is about the determination, and water is about the emotions and controlling the emotions, and earth is about understanding the body and all the pranic forces that go through the body and how to balance them, and air is about the thoughts or the mind and how to control that, and then ether is about the balance of all of that. The leader of the dragon nation, who set the example, commanded his armies, was the great Khan, and he was the supreme keeper of divine order. But we can know that the star Vega at 1605 Capricorn currently is a great center of initiation, and the winged lions go through initiation here as well as the dragons. And the winged lion is the soul family, or the part of ourselves that is the noble ruler, if you will. And what ruling means is to hold power correctly. And power in the stellar nations is not about force or power over. It's about the ability to be strong enough to run the divine frequency through yourself so that you can be a leader by holding the divine frequency and then pulling others towards that divine frequency and helping them to entrain up to raise their consciousness. So the initiation on Vega for the winged lion is the ability to hold themselves strongly open and sustain the divine frequency coming through. Now, the initiation for the dragon on Vega was to be the guardian of the winged lion. Remember, you can think about if the dragon is guarding divine will and divine law, what we're saying here as the winged lion is kind of the vessel for holding divine law and divine will and acting as the leader. So the dragon was to use its power and all its use of the elements and all the great gifts it was given to guard the winged lion. But somehow Khan started losing his perspective on Vega and his initiation. He didn't pass his initiation, basically, because he started thinking that the Creator made a mistake, because surely with his great prowess and physical powers and all that he could do, he was meant to rule the universes. How could this kind of benign winged lion who seemed to be just doing nothing, how could that be called power? So Khan started to rebel. Before we go on with Khan's story, let's meet the stellar nation of the great felines, because these two nations are intricately laced and particularly affected by Khan's actions. So the stellar nation of the great felines in the stellar language is Holonai Fa, which means keepers of the heart of freedom. And this nation are warriors of the goddess, and they protect with a feminine yin approach. And what this means is that they are assigned to also guard the winged lion as a representation of divine will, but the great felines also are charged with being the warriors that look for what's going on in the galaxy and where beings are being oppressed and not being allowed to have their right to free will, their freedom, their sovereignty. So what that means is that if a great feline is protecting the winged lion and essentially protecting divine will, but something about that winged lion goes off. If that winged lion ruler becomes despotic, descends into ego, doesn't serve divine will, the great feline's response is to immediately be on it. It's a very revolutionary force. It's a very much a force for the people, for the oppressed, for the underdog. And this comes from the feminine understanding. This is what the yin approach is. It's their feeling from within, that whole feminine understanding of what is right and wrong in creation. And when something isn't honoring life or the web of life and supporting that, that feminine instinct knows and then reacts to it. And that's contrary to the dragons, because we saw that the dragons are really much more about learning something and mastering systems, whereas the great feline in its feminine approach is about understanding that inner knowing. With the restive energy in the galaxy that was created by Khan's rebellion, by his feeling of wanting to go for power and not guard divine will, that set up a certain vibratory quality, and every sentient being really was then asked, on some level, conscious or unconscious, to look at their affiliation with the Creator, with creation. And what happened then with the great felines, they didn't get drawn by power, but their weakness with this vibratory question became the fact that their innate drive towards protecting independence and free will became a tragedy. Because in the name of freedom and independence, a small rebellious group started to form that was in opposition to divine will. And really, their opposition was based on a very democratic principle, because they thought, well, there should be no hierarchy. Nobody should be above anyone else. If you think about it, it was quite an Aquarian urge, but it wasn't happening at a time in the galaxy when there were mature enough forces to work with that Aquarian urge. So what happened is this group of rebellious great felines started to betray in kind of a step-by-step way, because with this idea of liberty and independence and exalting those values, it kind of led to a tear and then an alienation and an annihilation of the principle of freedom that they were upholding. And part of it was because cats, with their lonely sort of individual nature, began to get calcified in their feeling of being lonely and separate, and they started projecting that others couldn't tolerate their independence, and then they started withdrawing from meaningful relationships with others, and this started to contract and close them down into their own inner universe and minds, and they started thinking of the laws more in a personal sense than the universal sense that they were set up to guard. And this also created this individuality, disrupted the unity of the cat's army, because one thing that the dragons certainly had was a deep cohesion because of their kind of hierarchical, structured way of being together. So these individuals were not able to unite and respect cohesion. They couldn't follow a leader's command like the dragons did. And this became a very weak point for the big cats. And it worked against the ideal of the group. In fact, one of the hardest parts of working with ourselves or with others who have many soul aspects on great feline stars is it's hard to work in a group. But now it's very important, if we carry these feline codes, to return to the ability to consciously work in a group, because this is one of the definite cures for this galactic wound. So further, it's our great feline aspects that has to gain the understanding that we need to adopt the ideal of standing in balance in our own center within a community, which is really the flourishing of the true Aquarian ideal. So we're needing to bring a realignment with our mission of sovereignty and protecting free will. And if we're going to realize the power of the ascension, we need to understand that every global light generating idea lies in the idea of community. So this rebel group of great felines broke away from their nation and started to congregate on Beta Leonis Minoris, which is a star which is currently at Leo 2447. What happened next is that the rebellious great cats were drawn into a love bond with the dragons. And this attraction happened between the masculine essence of some dragon warriors and the female heart of some big cat warriors. And it came about by a mutual admiration, because they were both warriors and yet they had different attributes. On the dragon side, the great felines admired the physical strength and the power and the strategic capacity of the dragons, and they admired that they possessed the mystery of the 8 martial arts. Whereas the dragons admired in the felines that they had that skill and tenderness and sort of intuitive ingenuity to wait and to know when to be advantageously striking. So there was a galactic love that was born between these two nations. There was a secret galactic spot where these two energies paired in a love affair. And in the spirit of a strange wedding on the star Cherton at Virgo 1430, the lion's womb, The great felines opened themselves, accepting the seed of the dragon warriors into their body. But it turned out that this was more of an apparent love than an actual devotion felt, because this love was really quite one-sided. The great felines brought their feminine devotion into the mix, while underneath, the dragons brought their military strategy and minds, and they were really conscious of what they could gain by this affair. So this, in effect, was the place where pillow talk happened, and all the secrets of how the great felines defended the winged lions on various outposts around the galaxy were revealed, and this gave the dragons an incredible advantage. Now, of course, there was a relative purity to the great feline intentions. They did not know that this was what was happening. So it's very tragic, really. They can't be exempted from the act that they committed, and the responsibility of understanding this later absolutely crushed their hearts and created a deep spiritual burden, as we'll see as we go on and see what happened. Now, meanwhile, the dragon leader Khan was becoming more and more distorted with his lust for power, and he was going around the galaxy, attacking, trying to take over, trying to be a ruler. And this attracted the energy of the fallen angel, because we've seen that the angel nation also has a fallen component that wants to be guardians of creation outside of divine law. They want to create their own matrix of laws. So these two beings got together, and they had the benefit of the dragon power and the wiles and abilities of the angel to be very beautiful or invisible. And Khan then used the information that was gained from his warriors having the love affair to mastermind an incredibly immoral attack with the angel against the winged lion outposts that were being guarded by the great felines who had remained loyal to their mission. This attack happened on the star Algebra, which is at 2957 of Leo currently. And this star is on the neck of the lion. This is the point of the great feline betrayal and defeat. And essentially you can think of it like the neck was broken. And this is the first time that light was defeated by the darkness in the galaxy. And what it pointed out really is that there wasn't a true enough or deep understanding of the necessity to know and understand the shadow qualities in counterpoint to knowing the light qualities in creation. And what we can emphasize about this attack is that it was completely immoral. It went beyond any fair type of fighting, because it was a sneak attack using information that had been gained immorally through this supposed love affair, and the angels set up an invisibility shield. So the great felines who were guarding the winged lion had absolutely no idea that this attack was coming. And there really would have been nothing they could do, although they felt horrible guilt for it later, that they didn't see this coming, that they hadn't known the depth of the shadow and the darkness. This attack was a huge slaughter of the great felines and the winged lions. And many were murdered, some escaped into the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, but most of the great feline nation who were left sought to escape, and all the escape routes were cut off by the dragons, except for one remaining one. Before the dragons closed it off, those who could made it through to the Andromeda galaxy, which is at 2814 of Aries. And the Andromeda galaxy is a galaxy, a twin galaxy of the Milky Way that actually has a yin dominance. It's ruled by the goddess energy. And so the great felines who could made their way here. But the result was in our galaxy that our galaxy, instead of maintaining its balance of yin and yang energies as it had existed in, was tilted yang. And now the masculine patriarchal influence was embedded. As you can feel, this was a deep shock and trauma, and we have to know that this is still buried in our collective unconsciousness and in our individual consciousnesses in our own way, depending on how we experienced or participated in this whole energy pattern. So, to repeat, this is the first time that light was defeated by the dark. The depth of the dark wasn't understood, and the galaxy tilted into a yang dominance. And this unrightful, sudden, shocking expulsion of these warriors, and remember, these were the warriors who remained with their mission and were duped. They had no idea this was coming. This expulsion created a sense of deep betrayal while they were loyal to upholding their divine assignment of guarding free will and sovereignty. And it was a betrayal by their own sisters and brothers. And it very often resulted in anger, rage, a feeling of vengeance, but also a feeling of guilt and shame, because they felt like, could we have done more? Why didn't we see this coming? And additionally, there's a sense of abandonment. Like, why did this happen? Where is the divine? We were in service to the divine. And confusion about this. And then there's the reaction of freezing, of catatonia, of going vacant, of detaching, of feeling lost, and then feeling like a victim. There's the feeling of coming into fear because of all that happened. There's the feeling of defeat. There's the feeling of being isolated. There's the feeling of anxiety. And then that whole tendency to feel like one wants to be a loner and avoid all communal activities because they're just a hotbed of something going wrong. So these are all the kind of emotional frequencies that then came to rest inside our consciousness. And we need to understand that there's even a further complication here that we bear. And that is that there were progeny, children born of the marriage, the seeding between the dragon and the great feline. And these were hybrids of the dragon and the great feline. And it was Khan's idea that he was going to be creating this incredible warrior that would have the best attributes of both community. But it didn't work out like that. Sometimes you had more great feline qualities, sometimes more dragon qualities, but in the end you really ended up with kind of a clumsy mixture of both that wasn't that refined. And they were rejected by their mothers because their mothers were horrified. So these beings as hybrids were not trained, they were abandoned, they were not trained in any of their virtues, they were made to feel invisible. And if they were left in this galaxy, they just wandered alone, really, not knowing who they were, with great confusion about their roots. And then on top of that, Khan ordered the dragon fathers to gather these children when they could be found from their hiding and to bring them to him for training. And he was absolutely ruthless. If they had too much great feline of the phenome, he was afraid that they would become too independent, and so they were killed. And if they had enough dragon, they were ruthlessly trained to be warriors that were unconscionable. When the escaping great felines arrived to the Andromeda Galaxy, there was a star there that was offered as a refuge to them. And the name of this star is Christus, which actually means refuge in the stellar language. So they all had a place to come to and to be inside this yin galaxy. Now you might think that these escaped great felines had reached the Andromeda Galaxy, had a star of refuge, were in a galaxy that was led by the goddess, which is what their natural affinity is, and you might think they would feel at home. We're here. This is wonderful. But of course that's not true because of all the trauma. So there was many emotional patterns that were present, and a great mystery play happened really in this galaxy, where over time these patterns came to the surface and the groups reacted with and against each other to sort of play out and evolve these patterns. And these are patterns that are very active for us on Earth now. This is what we need to listen to and look at ourselves with regard to these patterns. Now, I will bring up soon that ultimately this has been solved in the Andromeda Galaxy, and that's a great resource to us because that is coming forward to us. But before we get there, we really need to understand what these patterns are, and we will notice them in ourselves. They're patterns that we may hold if we have great feline aspects strongly. We may hold one set of patterns more than another, or we may find that they're kind of all in us, and there's a sort of cross talk that happens based on whatever our daily lives and the situations in our lives prompts, what kind of feeling it brings up. So let's look at these. First, there was the memory that existed and created a militant and vengeful and wounded response that came from feeling undeservedly defeated and viciously attacked. So very often then, this part of us often still feels attacked and suspects that something is bad if certain people are secretly uniting against us behind our back. There may be a little paranoia. So what happens is kind of a let me defend myself before I need to, or let me be the first to respond when I feel threatened. So they attack, and they're very sensitive to their own sovereignty and their will being violated or restricted in any way. So they're always vigilant and feel obliged to kind of growl and bite the enemy. And then in contrast to this, we have that response of the soul that feels detached and lost and lays in fear really most of the time and feels themselves in the role of a victim. And in that role, they almost draw to them situations where people stronger than them choose them as a subject for their projections and their hurt, and other people are projecting onto them the feeling of being exploited, oppressed, dominated, and it's just not fair. I mean, they're actually feeling like that, but they're gaining the projection of someone else, really to show them that. But this can actually even lead into being victims of violence or abuse or domestic violence. And it's a defeated victim kind of quasi laying around, not having the energy even to attack again. So it's the opposite of this reaction. And then we have the aspect of ourselves that just pulls into kind of a complete isolation and rejecting the group and any existence within a group, because it's very stressful to be in a group. So there's a drive towards solitude and being independent. So no one or nothing limits you. No one tells you what to do or how to think or feel. And no one threatens their own living space. But remember, their living space is very isolated. So it's furnished with ideas that aren't necessarily in concert with the whole, and they just can't adopt to being in a group or a community space. Then we have the hybrids that did make it to the Andromeda Galaxy, and many of these had more the attributes of the great feline, but there was still some of that dragonness coming through, and they felt absolutely lost because they didn't understand themselves. We weren't really, nobody wanted to touch them. Nobody wanted to explain to them who they were. They were afraid that then they would grow in their dragon qualities and betray them again. So the hybrids were in a very isolated position by virtue of how they were created and why they were created. Over time in the Andromeda Galaxy, with these souls being all on Christos, as we just looked at, with all these energy patterns at work that needed healing, they eventually also took over a planet, Toga, and the moon to that planet, Kuga, and their groups outplayed among each other among these different bodies. And what we mean by outplayed is that first we had in the beginning this very militant group that became almost like a dragon force army, needed something to attack. And they attacked the victim feeling group. But in the end, there was really no satisfaction in that, because the victim group was so limpid that their great vengeance and anger was going against a force that didn't really respond or give them a fight. However, ultimately, interestingly, the evolution was that this victim group got so hopeless that they sort of felt like, what is there to lose? And they did start fighting back. And then a kind of growth happened in the victim group, and a sort of equilibrium happened between these groups. And those isolated ones stayed isolated, but eventually what happened is these three groups found a kind of common bond as they evolved, and they forced all the hybrids off to the moon, Kuga, and they made the hybrids the object of their projection, the object of that which they would attack, so they could feel united and justified together. So this was them learning how to be a group again and how to bring together some of their warrior qualities, but it was still happening at a low octave because they needed to be against something that was really part of their own selves. It was part of their own kind. Now, returning to the Milky Way galaxy, we learn from the Akashic records from Bay and Aniko that there is a huge black panther, Holonai Fa, keeper of the heart of freedom, in the southern hemisphere as a constellation. Now, we perceive it as many different other stars and constellations, but underneath, it's truly a black panther. And this black panther has a unique task. It's given its mission codes by the goddess, and they're to be servants and protectors of the rulers of the winged lions who are blessed with the divine power. However, this nation, the great felines, as we already said, but we need to emphasize, is also charged with watching out for any points where the rulers or kings or queens, leaders of any communities, misuse their power, where they go despotic. So this is my attempt to sketch out the Black Panther as it is among the stars, and you'll notice that held in the paw of the Black Panther is the peacock star, which is part of a constellation we think of as a peacock, but it's really an eighth dimensional star, which is the cradle of the great feline nation, because it's the flame of divine truth. It's the right use of free will, and it's the spiritual cradle, therefore, of the great feline nation, this flame that never dies. Now, going back to the Andromeda Galaxy, we've reached the point where the evolution of these wounds has come to the place, which I mentioned, where the three groups, the militant group, the victim group, and the isolated loner group, have evolved enough to find a certain kind of community among each other, but they've partly done that by turning against the hybrids, who they've isolated on the moon Kuga. However, this represents a point of enough evolution and healing that a great mystery and grace came forward from the Black Panther in our galaxy. So at one point from the peacock star that I just mentioned in the Black Panther constellation, which is at 2406 of Capricorn currently, and represents the flame of divine truth, freedom's eternal fire, the right use of free will. This also represents freedom as a sacred tool for fulfilling one's destiny. And as I said, it's the spiritual cradle of the great feline nation. From this star, an eighth dimensional star, a beautiful seventh dimensional goddess being was sent to the Andromeda Galaxy to work with and pull into final healing all the groups who had been exiled there. This beautiful jaguar goddess being named Myanmar Ankh, with a fantastic presence and power of consciousness, was sent as a messenger from the great Holonoi Fa, the constellation of the Black Panther, from the peacock star, the flame of freedom, and she came to the Andromeda Galaxy to heal the wounds and pains experienced by the exiles. Myanmar Ankh began to establish an amazing civilization. She built a very similar world to Egypt, with pyramids and temples and sphinx-like statues. And this was all happening on the planet Toga. And she brought peace there. She led her people with strength and pure, unquestionable wisdom. And she was able to bring home from the moon, Kuga, the hybrid bloodline, so they were no longer exiled. She actually created a big cat society in which all their qualities have a place. She directed the initiation of the martial arts into the big cat fighting forces, because knowing the martial arts as the dragons do teaches them how to be prepared, actually, to face the dragons if they need to, as a fighting force, if the dragons are against them, that kind of energy. But all this was done with the highest vibrational form. So the martial arts training is taking place at an extremely high level on the planet Toga and on the star Christus. because this training teaches the great felines how to control the forces of their body, to focus their mental forces, to transmute emotional impulses. So they can know then how to spot the attack of astral and dark forces and how to sniff out fallen dragons. So it is also part of the training to respect the opponent. And this is something that the hybrid bloodline has really learned. The honor has been restored and a place has been given to the hybrid generation in the Andromeda galaxy. But that's not something that's yet happened in the Milky Way galaxy. And in fact, really, none of this has fully come to pass in the Milky Way galaxy at this point. But this is the year of the return of the great feline. So when we think of the return of the great feline and the feminine goddess energy, we can imagine now that this is a fully healed energy, that all these patterns of guilt, shame, betrayal, victimization, etc. have been healed. And Mirama Ankh is now bringing that into the earth sphere, and we will feel that in our souls, especially if we have many great feline stellar worlds, because we've been vacant of that energy. It hasn't really been radiating strongly from the great feline stars in our Milky Way galaxy ever since the goddess was pushed out. And in fact, if you've got the Andromeda galaxy on your code at the ending of Aries, as we said, it's like a large part of your soul actually wasn't living in the same realm. It's hard to access. So this year, 2024, could be a great healing coming about for those who have been so divorced or removed from their soul aspects. So we've got Myanmar Ankh, who has healed her community, and she's prepared them in all the original goddess divine ideals and codes of destiny. And their grace, their cleverness, their attentiveness, their warrior nature in the night or their dark, which brings a protective, guarding attention, and their devoted love is coming back into the Milky Way galaxy and to the Earth plane. On Earth, we have yet to see these energetic patterns come into their full healing. However, on Beta Leonis Minoris, which is the star where the great felines first joined in rebellion when they questioned divine will and how to serve it, that star has become a very powerful galactic fate correction center. And this is this cosmic spot where the great feline beings who did remain in the Milky Way galaxy have been able to reunite and merge. There's been a light bridge created here where the beautiful and bright warriors call the goddess and call their sisters and brothers home. So they're welcoming in those disenfranchised parts of our souls on the galactic level, and they're welcoming in the brothers and sisters and Myanmar Ankh who are returning from the Andromeda galaxy. And it's a realm of rehabilitation where the great felines have learned to master divine will in the noblest sense. And this gives them a strength and wisdom to be carriers and models for a new level of balance between individual will and divine will. And this is because they now understand, and this is a part of us that we can realize we can understand, that we can keep our dignity if we stand in our true nature quietly and solidly, and that we'll be the freest when we no longer put our emphasis on the desire to be free, but on simply being free. And when we're in that state together, we'll really belong somewhere and we'll feel the power of unity, and we'll no longer want to feel separate as a expression of our sovereignty. In our expression of life on Earth, we can take this galactic story and what it's trying to tell us as far as the profound energy patterns that are in it. We can take it into our heart and understand that, first of all, it's showing us that what happens when we don't understand that there is shadow in counterpoint to light, and that we have to understand the depth of the shadow and walk through it really with cat's eyes, with our instincts open, honoring our own free will and sovereignty for our own selves, but also for the collective. And with that, we need to know that there's a profound hurt behind our ability to show up that way. This is when that aspect of ourselves, the feminine, was betrayed and expelled. So this is really a genesis story of us losing the feminine wisdom in our galaxy, losing a whole half of our being. And this only went on to compound more and more in the galactic stories. We see it coming on through the female serpent nation, and that just continues to deepen our understanding. But with this story alone, we can be aware that these are the patterns that are acting out on Earth now in our collective. The wars and the low octave aggression is really an example, particularly of the dragons gone awry. So with this understanding, we can bring more in, and we'll talk about that next. What do we do? I should really say we'll speak about what we can do in conclusion. There's just a few more things to have in mind to fill out our understanding of these patterns. So we've spoken of these patterns, and we've spoken of them as being more sort of an emotional wounding. But we need to know that those emotions do come into the body, and particularly because the dragon and great feline stellar aspects of ourselves are living codes that are expressed through our physical bodies. Now, this is a much bigger topic, and we'll have another video on this, but the stellar mantle, the remembering field we come in, which is a matrix of all these lines of light from our stellar cells, are configured on a spirit level, soul level, and physical level. And we're running these codes through us, sort of as our galactic DNA that we've developed on these different levels. And the dragon and great feline are physical. So we can see with some of the woundings, like for instance on the great feline, you may have neck problems because you were on algebra where the neck was broken of the lion. You may have pelvic problems because the great feline expresses from the creative emotional center in the sacral chakra, and then the dragon actually expresses from the solar plexus. And if you're a hybrid, you may have these two chakras sort of in conflict with each other. And there's many kinds of health things that can come up. Great felines can have a general weakness just because their stellar rays haven't been populated really by the goddess energy. It's been pushed out of the galaxy. And there's more of that explained in a blog that I will include below, as well as we'll have another video on that sometime. Lastly, let's talk about the dragons again, because this is the year of the return of the dragons and the great feline, and we've spent so much time on the great feline. But let's recall that Khan went power hungry. More happened to him later, which is part of the ongoing story. But basically, we were left, or the dragon part of us, which guards divine will, was left without a leader. In fact, the cradle of the dragon nation, the home star, exploded at one point, and that is the Omegan Orionis, which is the heart of the Orion constellation, and it's an exploded star, and that's because of this cosmic history. But not every dragon fell, and you can see the beauty and incredibleness of this nature, and we know that that energy is coming back. It's all the topic, really, of many people's awakening and awareness and their link with their dragon part, and the whole idea of how the dragons operate with the earth energy and the ley lines, and all that's being felt again. So that's the noble high octave of the dragon. And those aspects of ourselves didn't have a leader, so they were then really led by the Holy Spirit, for lack of Khan. And the Holy Spirit is a wonderful leader, but a rather obtuse leader. But in the evolution of the warrior nation of the dragons, there was a point 2,000 years ago when the higher consciousness, which we may call the Christ consciousness, the consciousness of fifth, sixth, seventh dimensions, incarnated in the person of Jesus. And there's a big backstory that came out in 2012, which was the year of the bears. The bears is the teachers of these heart qualities. And the backstory really is that these dragons started to get a new leader. They started to see and affiliate with this whole heart quality, and the whole warrior aspect took on not only defending the light of divine will, but also the love of the heart. So, in story form, hearing about the stellar nation of the great felines and the stellar nation of the dragons, these are the energies, these are the frequencies, these are the emotional patterns, the physical patterns that are coming forth into our collective and individual consciousness in 2024. And if we look, we can really see them all around us in the outpicturing of life now. And it's very important and it's very empowering for us to know really deeply in ourselves that the story of each of these stellar nations reflects a set of living codes, and they find their expression through us. And it's our call as cosmic humans to bring them up into consciousness and to raise them to higher octaves, to find our divine destiny as individuals, and then together as a collective. And with all this snarliness, we may feel like, well, what do we do? How do we work this? And the first order of business, really, the first very solid thing we can do is to find forgiveness. And forgiveness starts with self-forgiveness. So forgiveness is one of the heart qualities, that's one of the 7 wisdoms that lives in the Big Dipper. The 7 stars of the Big Dipper are 7 wisdoms that can be woken up in our heart so that we can sustain and live on a 5th, 6th, 7th dimensional consciousness. And in the next video, we'll talk about those 7 wisdoms and the heart qualities. Thank you for joining today for this. Namaste, be well.